After Batay. Hope you had a nice holiday. Hope you enjoyed everything. Let's continue now. We're going to the next holiday, which is Passover, Pesach, Bezat Hashem. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? There's so many halachot about Pesach. There's no end to it, You start, you never end, you never finish. So we have a lot to talk about. Okay. So I want to tell you just a basic thing here, which is that the main mitzvah of the Passover holiday is to eat the matzah. One of the main things. Positive commandment from the Torah, right? So what does that mean? We have to eat a kazayt of matzah. But the question is, right, what does the matzah have to be made from?
Wow.
You know what I mean? What is the how do you do the mitzvah of matzah? So it says the Shulchan Aruch that the matzah has to be made of one of the 5 species of grain to be yotzei dechobah, to fulfill the obligation. What are the 5 species of grain? Wheat, barley, right? Oats, spelt, and rye, right? I'm telling you in English. Those are the 5 species. So it has to be made of one of those species to fulfill the obligation of matzah. It's a very important thing to understand. But usually, we use wheat. Most people, right, we use wheat. Why? Why do we use wheat and not the other ones? What's the reason why? You go to the store, right? You go to the bakery. Nobody makes matzah from anything else but wheat. The minhag is to use wheat, right? Not the other ones. Why? Because wheat is the best, It's the most meshubach. It's the most praiseworthy, right? It's the highest quality of those 5 species. That's why. That's why we use wheat. But the thing is like this, interesting. What about if you use, can you make matzah from rice or corn, which is kitniot? Can you be yotzei dechovah from these species? What about if you make matzah from rice? Right, you can make. But the thing is, that it says the Shulchan Aruch, you cannot be yotzei dechovah with rice. Even though you're allowed to eat rice on Passover, right? We Sephardim, we have rice, we eat rice. It's not a problem for us. But nevertheless, right, you cannot do the mitzvah of matzah, right, to eat the achilat matzah with rice. Why is that, by the way? Because it's not one of the 5 species, That's why. It has to be from those 5 species. Otherwise, you cannot fulfill your obligation. So therefore, yeah, you can, if you want, if you're a little bit crazy, whatever, you can make matzot from rice, and use it for Passover. You can do that if you want. But you cannot do it for the mitzvah. That's the thing, You have to know what's the difference between this and that, right? So make sure you only use the 5 species. Here's the thing, right? Something interesting, which is, nowadays, there are a lot of people who have a medical condition. It's called gluten intolerance. You ever hear about this before?
Yeah.
Anybody has this?
No.
No. Baruch Hashem. It seems like we Sephardim, we don't have so much, this thing, right? It's not in our genes, whatever. I don't know. We don't really have it so much. Gluten intolerance. But the thing is like this, right? All those 5 species that we mentioned, especially wheat, right? It has gluten. So somebody who has intolerance gluten, how does he do the mitzvah of matzah? This is the question, right? What do you do, So you know what the answer is? There is one of those 5 species that doesn't have gluten. Which one is that? The oats, right? Shibolet shual, right? That's the one. So oats doesn't have gluten. So if a person, right, has intolerance gluten, he has this condition, doctor told him, right, you cannot have gluten. People know, by the way, they cannot have it because if they eat it, they get sick, It's a very scary thing, They cannot tolerate it. The stomach cannot digest it. They can't eat that stuff, you know what I mean? So what does a person like that do? You have to make matzot from oats, from shibolet shual. That's the way to do it, You can be yotzei dechovah because it doesn't have gluten. I saw, by the way, in Israel, that they make special, like matzah like this from oats for the people who have gluten intolerance, because there are now many people like that who cannot eat gluten. So this is what they have to eat. They have to eat oat matzah. That's the thing, Otherwise, what are they going to do? Right, as we said, right, they cannot use anything else except the 5 species. So there's no other choice. You understand? So, also, I want to tell you, right, that as we said, right, we mentioned the rice. So a question is like this with rice. Why is it that the Ashkenazim don't eat rice? What's the reason for this? They don't eat rice on Passover. They don't eat any kitniot, right? Of the legumes. They don't eat. Whether it's rice, whether it's corn, whether it's chickpeas and the tahina, they don't eat also. All these things, right? Why? What's the reason for this? So the truth is, that there is a machloket in the Talmud. If rice, can be chametz, can become chametz. There is a machloket. But the Talmud paskins over there, that rice cannot become chametz. Did you ever notice, by the way, when you cook rice, it puffs up, doesn't it? It like gets bloated, right? Puffs. So isn't that like leaven? Isn't that like chametz? It puffs up, gets airy, gets big. Isn't that chametz? So the Chazal say, even though the rice puffs up when you cook it, it's not chametz, that puffing. It's a different process, It's not leavening. Not the same thing. It's like it's a form of rots. That's why, it's a rotting process, That's what it is with rice. It's not leavening. So therefore, the Talmud paskins that rice is allowed on Passover because it doesn't leaven rice. It doesn't leaven it. It rises, it goes, it puffs, but it's not called leaven. That's not called leavening, according to the Talmud.
Doesn't it get filled with a moisture or something like that?
Yeah, it gets moist. Right, that's what it is. It's like a rotting process. It's like. So anyway, the question is, if that's the case, right? Talmud paskins that rice is not leavening on it doesn't leaven. So then why don't the Ashkenazim why don't they eat it? What, they don't believe in the Talmud? This is the question, What's going on with them? What is it with them? So the truth is, that if you look in the older, poskim, from Rishonim, the earlier authorities, even the Ashkenazi authorities I'm talking about. So who am I talking about? Like the Tur, like Rabbeinu Yerucham, like Rashi. Rashi was also Ashkenazi. He lived in France. They were all Ashkenazi, these rabbis. You know what they said, all these rabbis? They said, that there are some communities that have minhag not to eat rice on Passover, So you know what they said about this? Minhag shtuti. What does that mean? It's ridiculous. A ridiculous minhag, that they don't eat rice on Passover. It's ridiculous. So what does that mean? There's no logic in it, As we said, right? The Talmud says, you're allowed to have rice on Passover. It doesn't leaven. That's what they said. Huh? What do you say, David?
This doesn't mean because they don't eat the rice, they go against the Torah. So what? They don't eat the rice.
Right, but what's the reason for it? That's the question, right? That's what we're asking.
Not my business. It's not.
Well, we have to figure it out. It's our business. This is Torah. We have to figure it out, David.
No,
you cannot say it's not our business.
They don't want to eat.
They don't want to eat. Okay, but we have. That's not good enough. We have to know what the reason is.
They eat rice in the Passover. They make avon. If you don't eat, they don't make avon.
We have to know what the reason is, though. That's the thing, right?
Because sometime.
If you don't know the reason, let me say the reason.
Okay.
If you don't know, you don't know. What can you do, right? If you don't know, you have nothing to teach us. So let's learn something, right? So the truth is, that as we said, right, the earlier authorities, they all said that this minhag shtut, it's nonsense. They don't eat rice on Passover. That's what they believed. But these rabbis were Ashkenazi. I'm not talking about the Sephardi rabbis. The Sephardi rabbis never even, thought about this before.
They were eating rice.
Exactly. They were also eating rice, these rabbis. They were eating, yeah. So the question is then, why? What's the reason of the Ashkenazim? So you know what the answer is? The answer is that they had a problem, over there, in those places where they lived. Also could be that there was in other places as well. Which was, that they used the same sack
Bags.
to hold, right?
The bags.
The sack, right? A sack is not a bag. It's like a big one, sack, those big ones, right? It's like a sleeping bag. Large one, right? They had sacks. They used to put in the same sack. They used to reuse it. It wasn't disposable like today. Today everything we throw away. Disposable, right? Everything we throw it away. We say, oh, it's germs. It's got bacteria, germs. We don't want to use something 10 times. These kinds of things. So what they used to do is they would use that bag, right, sack, right? They would use it one time for rice, and then one time for wheat. You understand? So what happened was, because sometimes there was wheat left over there. You know what I mean? And they put it in the same sack. So it could be, that it's mixed in together, the wheat with the rice. This is the reason why the Ashkenazim, they stopped eating rice on Passover because it was getting mixed in there, in the same sack. So the truth is, nowadays, we don't have this problem, right? Because, they don't use the same sack for rice and wheat, it doesn't exist, this kind of thing. What do you say? I'm sorry, yeah.
Wheat doesn't make it chametz. The yeast inside make it chametz.
Right, but once it gets wet, it becomes chametz. That's what it is, right? Once the wheat gets water on it, it's chametz. That's it.
That's how we do matzah. We mix water with some...
Right, but the thing is, that... Yeah, he's asking a good question, right? So you know what the answer is? That we have to... When the wheat gets wet, we have to put it in the oven within 18 minutes. Otherwise, it's going to become chametz. So we have to go fast, If you wait 18 minutes, it's chametz. That's it. Gamanu.
Even without yeast? Even without yeast?
Yeah, even without yeast, just water. So they don't use yeast to make matzah. They don't use yeast. They don't use it.
Using yeast to make a bread.
Right, but they're not allowed to use it. You're not allowed to use it for matzah, yeast, because it rises. It makes it leavened, right? So the thing is that this is the whole thing, with the Ashkenazim. That's the reason why they stopped using rice. So what happened was that eventually, little by little, all the communities, the Ashkenazim, they stopped using rice for Passover. They stopped eating rice in Passover. This is what happened. Because it gets mixed up together, right? One with the other, But the thing is, we, Sfardim, we also had this situation, in the old days. They were using the same sack for both. So then what were we doing to solve this problem? You know what they were doing, right? They were sifting it, right? Borer, they were checking it, to see if there's any wheat in there. They were checking it out. You know what I mean? And if they found something, they would remove it. That's what they would do, Because wheat and rice don't look the same, right? Wheat looks different, right? It's larger and it's round. Rice is flat, and small. It's not the same. It doesn't look the same. You understand? So this is the whole thing, with the Ashkenazim. This is the reason why they stopped using rice, for Passover. And then because of the rice, they also stopped all the legumes, corn, everything, right? Everything they stopped because they all look the same. They're all similar one to the other. Legumes, you can make a mistake one with the other. They stopped everything, That's what they did.
Maybe also the amount chametz you can get into produce. Let's say, like if you get milk in a food, 1 to 60 amount is allowed. But if you get one small chametz into big loaf of bread, it's not.
You see what he's asking? He's saying something good there. Right? So you know what the answer is, right, to your question? The answer is that when the Chachamim decreed, that even though usually, right, something gets bottled, nullified, 160, right, as you said, right? But on Passover, it doesn't get bottled. Lo batel, right? La batil. And so it doesn't solve the problem, this thing, So what does that mean? If you take, right, a sack on Passover, right, on Pesach, and there's wheat in there, and you make matzot, even though it's a little bit, 160, doesn't matter. It's still asur to eat this. Because it doesn't get nullified on Passover. Why did the rabbis say, it doesn't get nullified on Passover? The rabbis made this. It's not from the Torah, this rule. Why?
You want to hear the answer?
What's the answer?
Well, the Egyptian was the one who came up with yeast idea. They were using they was first created yeast, and it was a very strategic. They was a bread.
I don't think you understand my question. I'm not sure if you understand my question. The question is like this, right? Why does the rabbis decree? The rabbis were not in Mitzrayim. They were not in Egypt. Why did they decree that doesn't get nullified? It has nothing to do with Mitzrayim. They weren't in Egypt, the rabbis. They were in Eretz Israel. Right? They were not there. So the answer is, that they wanted to be strict, for Passover, more strict than other things. You know what I mean? More machmir, because it's a very heavy thing, to eat chametz on Passover. Isur karet. You get cut off from the Jewish people. You know what I mean? To eat chametz, So it's a very heavy isur, and also there's another thing. I'll tell you something interesting. We'll finish here. I don't want to go too long, but here's the thing, right? You know what they say? That Lot, remember the story, right? With Lot. He invited the angels, when they came to Sodom and Amorah. They came there. It was Passover, right? Right? It says, the Chazal say, Rashi says, right? It was Pesach that night that he invited them. So what did he do? He fed them, matzot. He also made matzot, Lot. So where did he learn this from, Lot? Lot was a big tzaddik like this? Where did he learn this from? He learned from Avraham Avinu. He was Talmid of Avraham Avinu, And then he left the yeshiva, he went to, became a bum, right? Became a punk. But originally, he was in the yeshiva of Avraham Avinu, right? Avraham Avinu was teaching him everything. So he learned a lot of things from Avraham Avinu, So he was keeping Pesach also. What does it mean to keep Pesach? This was before Pesach, What is it? Lot, what does that have to do with Pesach? Huh? What's the answer to that? What's the answer to that question? Why are you keeping Pesach before Mitzrayim? What for? What do you need it for?
It wasn't exactly Pesach.
It was Pesach, yeah. Matzot.
Celebration of conquering army that took the Lot as a slave. Remember?
So what the answer is? The answer is like this: that they used to keep Pesach, the tzaddikim, even before Mitzrayim. Why? What do you need it for? This is going to be afterwards. So what the answer is? The answer is that on Passover, it's a very holy time. It's a very kadosh time. Pesach. So because of this, if you eat, doesn't matter, Mitzrayim, no Mitzrayim. If you eat chametz on Passover, your neshama gets very damaged by that. Because it's a very kadosh time, You're not allowed to eat chametz. So this applies even before Mitzrayim. This problem. So that's why Lot was keeping, Passover, even though he was before Mitzrayim. So what do you see from there, That it's a very dangerous thing. Even they knew, those people, before Mitzrayim, they knew that it's very dangerous to eat chametz on Passover, Very bad for the neshama. Karet, Yisur karet. So the rabbis came, and said, listen, this is very dangerous. So we're going to make a rule. What's the rule? It doesn't get nullified, even in 60, doesn't get nullified. On Passover, if you make something, it doesn't get nullified. But here's the thing, right? It does get nullified if you make it before Passover. That's why it's good, to make all the food, for Passover, before Passover. You know why? Because if you've got something, mistake there, it gets nullified before Passover. You can eat it on Passover. But if you make it on Passover, if you cook it on Passover, it doesn't get nullified. Before Passover, it does. That's the way the rabbis made it, So therefore, a lot of people, what they do is they make all the food, before Passover, and they keep it in the fridge, in the freezer, because it's better this way, it makes it easier. ברוך ה' לעולם, אמן ואמן. רבי חנין שאומר, עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל, לפיכך כי בא להם תורה מצוות של מה אדוני חפש, למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.